A millionaire sees his maid's twin boys playing quietly in his garden until they look up, smile, and say one word that stops his heart: Daddy. At first, he thinks it's just a childish mix-up, but when he notices their eyes, their sketches, and the names they answer to, everything starts to unravel, because these twins don't just like him. There's a reason they're in his house, and it goes deeper than he ever imagined. Who are these boys? What secret has been living right under his roof? And what will he do when he finds out the truth was never really hidden at all? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Damien Vale adjusted his sunglasses, squinting at the bright morning sun reflecting off the glass walls of his architectural firm's headquarters. The rooftop garden, normally his private sanctuary, had been transformed into a carnival of noise and activity for the annual Family Day event. Children's laughter mixed with adult chatter floating up toward the cloudless sky. He checked his watch. 10:45 a.m. Already 45 minutes late, exactly as he'd planned. Sarah from PR had practically begged him to make an appearance, insisting it would help soften his reputation as the company's reclusive founder. Damien had agreed only after she promised he could leave after an hour. The rooftop garden stretched out before him, dotted with activity stations and food tables. Employees' children darted between carefully maintained planters filled with native flowers and herbs. Some of his best sustainable design elements were on display here. The living walls, the rainwater collection system, the solar panels doubling as shade structures. But today, they served as merely backdrops for face painting and balloon animals. Damien kept to the edges of the crowd, nodding politely when necessary but maintaining his distance. He headed toward the refreshment tables, hoping a cup of coffee might make the next 45 minutes more bearable. That's when something caught his eye. A flash of white paper and the familiar scratch of pencils against paper. Two young boys sat cross-legged near the design display booth, hunched over a large sheet of paper. Their dark heads bent together in concentration, small hands moving with surprising precision. Something about their intense focus drew him closer. The drawing taking shape beneath their pencils made Damien stop dead in his tracks. His heart seemed to skip a beat as he stared at the intricate sketch, a treehouse, but not just any treehouse. The curved supports, the wraparound deck, the way it seemed to grow organically from the tree itself. He knew every line of that design by heart. Without thinking, he knelt beside them. The boys looked about 6 or 7, identical twins from their matching features. One wore a red t-shirt, the other blue. Their dark hair slightly messy as if they'd been running around earlier. "That's an interesting design," Damien said softly, trying to keep the shake out of his voice. The boy in blue looked up, studying Damien with startlingly intelligent eyes. There was something familiar in that thoughtful gaze, something that made Damien's chest tighten inexplicably. The boy tilted his head, dark eyes widening as they fixed on Damien's face. "Daddy?" The word hit Damien like a physical blow. He felt the color drain from his face, his mind struggling to process what he'd just heard. Before he could form any response, both boys jumped to their feet, their drawing forgotten on the ground. "Mommy! Mommy!" they called out in excited unison, running toward a woman standing near the herb garden. She turned at their voices and Damien felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Lila Ray, his housekeeper of 3 years, the quiet, professional woman who kept his penthouse in perfect order while somehow never seeming to be there when he was home. She wore a simple sundress instead of her usual work clothes, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Their eyes met across the garden. Lila's face remained carefully composed as she gave him a polite nod, the same one she gave him every morning before disappearing into the background of his life. Her hands came to rest protectively on her son's shoulders as she guided them away, their excited chatter fading into the general noise of the party. Damien stood frozen, watching them disappear into the crowd. His mind raced with calculations he didn't want to make, possibilities he wasn't ready to face. The boy's voice echoed in his head. "Daddy?" Later that night, in the silence of his penthouse, Damien pulled out a box he hadn't opened in years. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted out an old sketchbook, its pages yellow with age. He flipped through quickly until he found it. The treehouse design he'd drawn when he was 12, the one that had won him his first architecture competition. In the corner, written in his careful childhood handwriting, was a name he'd chosen for himself during that lonely year after his parents' death. Callan Oak. He stared at it, remembering how he'd combined his middle name with his favorite type of tree, creating a secret identity for himself when his real name felt too heavy to bear. "That's not possible," he whispered to the empty room. But the identical designs, one from his past, one drawn today by two little boys, told a different story. The lights of the city sparkled beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows, but Damien barely noticed them. His mind was stuck on Lila's careful nod, the boys' identical faces, and a growing suspicion that his carefully ordered world was about to change forever. "That's not possible," he whispered again, but his voice held less conviction this time. The next day, the morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Damien's study, but he barely noticed. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up file after file. Sarah from PR had already called twice about the missed board meeting, but he'd silenced his phone. Nothing else mattered right now. Lila Ray's employee file filled his screen. He'd never looked at it before. She'd come highly recommended through his staffing agency. Her work was impeccable, and that had been enough. Now, every detail seemed crucial. His eyes caught on her previous name, Lila Chen. The knot in his stomach tightened. With trembling hands, he opened another window and logged into an encrypted folder he hadn't accessed in years. The fertility clinic's documentation appeared, filed under the name Daniel V. He'd chosen it hastily, his middle name and first initial, wanting something both true and anonymous. The dates aligned perfectly. Everything aligned perfectly. Damien pushed back from his desk, running his hands through his hair. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. He walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. The city stretched out below, but his mind was already drifting back 5 years. The hospital room had been too quiet after they turned off the machines. Kate, his sister, lay still against white sheets, but her last words echoed in his head. "Promise me you won't end up alone, Dam. Promise me you'll try." He'd promised, of course. He would have promised her anything in those final moments. But in the weeks that followed, as he buried himself in work and avoided the empty spaces she'd left behind, that promise felt impossible to keep. The fertility clinic hadn't been part of any plan. He'd spotted it during one of his late-night walks, when sleep proved elusive and his apartment felt like a tomb. The sign in the window advertised their need for donors. Something about it had called to him. Maybe the idea of creating something positive in a world that suddenly felt so empty. The process had been surprisingly simple. Forms to fill out, tests to take, questions to answer. He checked every box for anonymity, declined all future contact options. It wasn't about building a family. It was about keeping a promise to Kate in the only way he could manage at the time. Plant a seed, create a possibility, then walk away. Back in the present, Damien found himself drawn to the kitchen doorway. The sounds of breakfast drifted out, clinking plates, childish giggles, Lila's gentle voice. He stayed hidden around the corner, watching. The twins sat at the breakfast bar, identical except for their expressions. Rowan, the more animated one, was carefully constructing what looked like a bridge from pieces of toast. His tongue stuck out slightly in concentration as he balanced another piece. "Look, Mommy, it's got support beams like the big bridge downtown." Lila smiled, flipping another pancake. "Very engineering-minded, sweetheart. Just remember to eat it before it gets cold." Callan, quieter but just as focused, had transformed his napkin into an intricate folded structure. "It's a roof," he explained, though no one had asked. "See how it catches the light?" He tilted it slightly, demonstrating how the folds created shadows. Damien's throat tightened. He recognized that analytical tone, that way of seeing the world through its structures and shapes. He'd been the same way at their age, always building, always observing. Lila moved between her sons, dropping fresh pancakes onto their plates. "What shapes should we make today?" "Stars!" Rowan shouted. "Houses," Callan said more softly, but just as firmly. "How about one of each?" Lila suggested, already pouring the batter in careful patterns. Her movements were precise, practiced. She made it look like a dance, this act of caring, of creating, of making ordinary moments special. Damien withdrew silently, retreating to his study. The locked bottom drawer of his desk seemed to call to him. The key was still on his keyring, though he hadn't opened this drawer in years. The letter lay where he'd left it, sealed in an envelope that had yellowed slightly with age. He'd written it the day after his donation, in a moment of unexpected emotion. The clinic had suggested writing something for potential future children, a tradition many donors participated in, they'd said. He'd intended to throw it away, but somehow never had. With careful fingers, he lifted out the single page and unfolded it. "To whoever you might become, I build things. That's what I know how to do. Every building starts with a foundation, solid ground to build upon. Then comes the framework, each beam and support carefully placed. Walls rise, windows open to let in light, and finally, a roof to shelter whatever life grows inside. I don't know if you'll ever exist. I don't know if you'll ever read these words, but I want you to know that you were built on hope. Hope that something good could come from grief, that something strong could rise from broken ground. May you build your own life exactly as you choose. May you find light in unexpected windows and strength in hidden beams." Damien folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into its envelope. "This wasn't supposed to mean anything," he said aloud to his empty study. The words felt hollow, even to himself. He walked to the window, looking down at the garden where he knew Lila took the boys in the evenings. The carefully tended space was empty now, but he could imagine them there, running between the planters, examining the flowers, building their own worlds in the peaceful green space he'd created for entirely different reasons. The next morning, Damien adjusted his usual schedule. Instead of taking breakfast in his study, he settled at the kitchen table well before the twins' usual arrival time. He spread architectural blueprints across the polished surface, but his attention kept drifting to the doorway. Right on schedule, he heard the familiar sound of small feet padding down the hallway. The boys' voices carried, discussing something about paper airplanes and wind resistance. Damien pretended to focus on his work, though his heart beat faster with each approaching step. Lila entered first, moving efficiently to start breakfast preparations. She gave him a polite nod, professional as always, though surprise flickered briefly across her face at his presence. The twins tumbled in after her, their energy immediately filling the quiet space. Callan noticed him first. The more observant twin paused, clutching something made of folded paper in his hands. He hung back for a moment, studying Damien with that intense focus that seemed far too mature for his age. Then, gathering his courage, he approached the table. "Mr. Vale," Callan's voice was soft but clear. "Do you think this looks like a real roof?" He held up his paper creation, a carefully folded structure with multiple angles and overlapping sections. Damien set down his pencil and really looked at it, treating the model with the same seriousness he would give any professional presentation. A genuine smile spread across his face. The design showed real intuition, especially for someone so young. "This is very good," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "May I?" He held out his hand. Callan carefully placed the paper model in his palm. Damien turned it slowly, examining each fold. You've got the basic principle exactly right. But see this angle here? He pointed to where two sections met. If this were a real roof, you'd want to adjust it slightly. The support wouldn't be strong enough in heavy rain. Callan's eyes lit up with understanding. Like this. He made a quick adjustment to the fold and Damien nodded approvingly. Perfect. That simple exchange seemed to break down an invisible barrier. Over the next few weeks, the twins began gravitating to Damien's end of the table each morning. They started calling him Mr. D, Rowan's idea, which Callan quickly adopted. Damien found himself looking forward to these breakfast sessions, where architectural discussions mixed naturally with childish chatter about cartoons and school projects. Callan brought him increasingly complex paper models, each one showing remarkable spatial awareness. Damien taught him about load-bearing walls and stress points, explaining complex concepts in simple terms. The boy absorbed everything like a sponge, asking thoughtful questions that often made Damien pause and really consider his answers. Rowan, not to be left out, brought his own creative challenges. He was particularly interested in symmetry, though his approach was more intuitive than technical. Damien showed him how to fold paper exactly in half, how to measure equal distances, how to create perfect mirror images. Rowan's excitement when things lined up correctly was contagious. One morning, Callan arrived with an ambitious project, a small-scale model of what he called a wind-powered house. The concept was crude but innovative, showing remarkable insight into environmental design principles. Damien spent an hour helping him refine the idea, showing him how to channel airflow more effectively through the structure. During these interactions, Damien couldn't help noticing Lila's careful distance. She maintained her professional demeanor, efficient and courteous, but never lingered during these impromptu design sessions. Sometimes he caught her watching them, her expression a mix of confusion and something deeper he couldn't quite read. After a particularly impressive morning working with Callan on his wind power concept, Damien made a private call to Marcus Chen, who sat on the board of the Children's Institute for Design Innovation. The prestigious program rarely evaluated children as young as the twins, but Damien knew talent when he saw it. "I need a favor," Damien said, keeping his voice low in his study. "There are two boys I'd like the Institute to evaluate." Marcus sighed. "Damien, you know we don't typically." "I know, but this is different. Test them purely on merit, no special treatment. In fact, don't even mention my name. I want this completely anonymous." "You're asking me to arrange a secret evaluation of mystery children?" Marcus sounded skeptical but intrigued. "This isn't like you. Just meet them first. You'll understand." While waiting for Marcus's response, Damien continued his morning routine with the twins. He found himself arriving earlier, staying longer, looking forward to their questions and discoveries. Their enthusiasm reminded him of something he'd almost forgotten, the pure joy of creation, unfettered by budgets and board meetings. Lila's confusion was evident in small ways, a lingering look here, a slight hesitation there. Damien had barely spoken 10 words to her in the 2 years she'd worked for him, preferring to communicate through notes and schedules. Now, he was a daily presence in her children's lives, teaching and encouraging them with a patience she'd never suspected he possessed. One evening, after the twins had gone to bed, Damien was in the kitchen making tea when he noticed a broken toy on the counter. It was a small mechanical dog, one of Rowan's favorites, with a loose leg hanging by a spring. Without really thinking about it, he set down his cup and picked up the toy. The repair was simple enough, just a matter of realigning the spring and tightening a few small parts. He was so absorbed in the task that he didn't hear Lila enter the kitchen. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. Damien looked up, still holding the toy. Lila stood in the doorway, her professional mask slightly softened by the late hour. He turned the now fixed dog in his hands, checking the leg's movement one last time. "I know," he replied, setting it carefully on the counter. "They remind me of someone I used to be." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and something electric filled the space between them. All the unspoken questions, all the careful distance they'd maintained, seemed to hover in the air. Lila's expression shifted, revealing a glimpse of the confusion and uncertainty she usually kept hidden. Damien found himself unable to look away, caught in this moment of unexpected honesty. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them was ready to say. The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft scratching of pencil on paper. Most of the house staff had gone home hours ago, and the twins were tucked safely in bed. Lila paused in the doorway, surprised to find Damien still there, bent over what appeared to be a sketch. The overhead lights were dimmed, leaving just the warm glow of under-cabinet lighting to illuminate his work. She hesitated, then moved to the kettle. The familiar routine of making tea gave her something to focus on besides the unusual intimacy of the moment. The clink of ceramic and the gentle whoosh of boiling water filled the silence. Almost without thinking, she prepared 2 cups instead of 1. Damien looked up at the sound, offering a slight nod of acknowledgement. Lila took a deep breath and carried both cups to the table. "May I join you?" she asked, her voice professional despite the late hour and casual setting. "Please." Damien pushed aside some of his papers to make room. Lila set down his tea and settled into the chair across from him. Steam rose between them in delicate spirals. She wrapped her hands around her cup, gathering courage. "Mr. Vale," she began, then corrected herself. "Damien, I hope you don't mind me asking, but why are you spending so much time with the boys?" He didn't answer immediately, his fingers tracing the edge of his sketch. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Did you know I had a sister?" Lila shook her head. "Claire." The name came out like a prayer. "She was 12 years older than me. When our parents died, she gave up everything, college, career plans, her whole life, to raise me." He picked up his pencil again, adding light strokes to his drawing as he spoke. "She's the one who taught me to love design." Lila watched his hands move across the paper, steady and precise even in this moment of vulnerability. "Claire would give me these challenges," he continued. "She'd point to a building and ask me to imagine it differently. Taller, shorter, with wings or bridges or gardens in the sky. She made it into a game, but really, she was teaching me to see possibilities everywhere." He reached into his portfolio and pulled out a worn photograph. A teenage girl with Damien's dark hair smiled at the camera, her arm around a small boy who was focused intently on a sketch pad. "She sounds wonderful," Lila said softly. She was. Damien's fingers lingered on the photograph. "She always said I'd be a great father someday, that I had too much love for design not to pass it on." He gave a quiet laugh that held more pain than humor. "I actually thought, well, life had other plans. And after she passed, I couldn't—" He trailed off, but Lila understood. Grief had its own timeline, its own way of reshaping the future we thought we'd have. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their tea. Then Damien pulled out a larger set of blueprints from beneath his other sketches. "This is what I've been working on," he said, spreading the papers across the table. "The city commissioned a new children's park, but I've been redesigning it as a learning garden. Interactive zones where kids can explore architectural principles through play." Lila leaned forward, intrigued. The designs showed climbing structures that demonstrated different support systems, water features that illustrated flow dynamics, and small-scale building areas where children could experiment with basic construction concepts. "It's beautiful," she said, tracing one of the pathways with her finger. "I'd like your help with it," Damien said quietly. "You and the boys, the early models especially. Children see things differently. They find possibilities adults miss, and you have an eye for how spaces feel, how they flow." Lila looked up, startled by the sincerity in his voice. "Are you sure?" "Very sure." He slid some blank paper and a pencil toward her. "If you're willing." After a moment's hesitation, Lila picked up the pencil. Damien moved his chair around the table so they could both see the blueprints properly. Their shoulders nearly touched as they bent over the designs together. Time seemed to slow in the quiet kitchen. They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by soft suggestions and thoughtful questions. Lila found herself relaxing into the process, adding gentle curves to balance Damien's clean lines, suggesting cozy nooks where parents could watch their children play. The intimate atmosphere reminded her of late nights in design school, before life had taken its unexpected turns. There was something peaceful about creating together, about watching an idea take shape between two minds. When Lila finally noticed the time, she was surprised to find 2 hours had passed. She gathered her cup, hiding a yawn behind her hand. "I should get some sleep," she said, standing. "The boys wake up early." Damien nodded, beginning to collect his sketches. Then he paused, looking up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You've raised good boys, Lila." The simple praise caught her off guard, warming something deep in her chest. "I didn't do it alone," she replied softly. "They've always had something guiding them." Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm patches across the table that was barely visible beneath layers of craft paper, colored pencils, and tiny cardboard structures. The weekend morning had transformed the usually pristine space into a creative workshop, with the twins' enthusiasm spilling over in the form of scattered eraser shavings and paper scraps. Callan sat cross-legged on his chair, his tongue poking out slightly as he concentrated on drawing the perfect tree. His small hands moved with surprising precision as he added delicate branches, each one carefully considered. Beside him, Rowan bounced in his seat, surrounded by a collection of bridge designs that ranged from practical to fantastical. "Look, Mr. D double exclamation mark Rowan held up his latest creation, a suspension bridge made from twisted paper clips and string. It's like the one in your big book." Damien leaned over to examine the model, his usual formal demeanor softened by a genuine smile. "The Golden Gate Bridge? You've captured the basic principles quite well." He pointed to the main support structure. "Though maybe we could make it a bit stronger here." Lila watched the interaction from across the table, her heart warming at how naturally Damien spoke to her sons. No talking down, no false praise, just honest engagement with their ideas. She turned back to her own sketch, adding details to a reading nook she'd envisioned for the park. "That's beautiful," Damien said quietly, noticing her work. "The way you've created those intimate spaces within the larger design." "Oh, it's just something I remembered from my studies," Lila replied, then paused, surprising herself with the admission. "Studies?" Damien's voice was gentle, curious but not pushing. Lila smoothed her hand over the paper, tracing the curved lines she'd drawn. "I was in interior design school before." She glanced at the twins, who were now deeply engaged in an animated discussion about whether their miniature park needed a moat. "Before life intervened." Damien nodded, understanding in his eyes. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, helping the boys with their creations and adding their own elements to the growing design. The morning passed in a blend of soft laughter and focused concentration. "Did you read The Architecture of Happiness?" Damien asked suddenly, as he helped Callan secure a particularly stubborn tree to its base. Lila's eyes lit up. "De Botton? That was one of my favorites in school, the way he connected emotional well-being to spatial design. We arrange our rooms as we wish to arrange our thoughts," Damien quoted, smiling. "And our houses are where we look for ourselves," Lila finished, returning his smile. Their conversation flowed easily after that, weaving between favorite buildings, memorable projects, and shared appreciation for different architectural styles. The twins contributed their own observations, their childish insights often making both adults laugh. "The Guggenheim looks like a giant snail shell," Rowan declared, prompting a discussion about spiral forms in architecture. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Lila noticed the boys beginning to fade. Callan's careful drawings became less precise, and Rowan's endless energy finally showed signs of waning. "I think it's nap time," she said softly, watching Callan try to stifle a yawn. The boys protested weakly, but their heavy eyelids betrayed them. After Lila tucked them in, she found Damien on the patio, 2 cups of tea already waiting. The garden was peaceful in the afternoon light, with a gentle breeze stirring the leaves. "Thank you," she said, accepting the cup and settling into one of the comfortable patio chairs. "For today, the boys, they don't often get to share their creativity like this." Damien nodded, his expression thoughtful. After a moment, he asked, "Their names, Callan and Rowan. They're unusual choices, beautiful but unusual." Lila's fingers tightened slightly around her cup. She looked out at the garden, gathering her thoughts. "When I was preparing to have them, I spent a lot of time thinking about names. I wanted something meaningful, something that would give them strength." She took a sip of tea before continuing. "They're both types of trees. The Callan oak is known for its endurance, its ability to weather storms, and the Rowan tree is celebrated for its flexibility, the way it can bend without breaking." She glanced at Damien and was startled by his expression. All the color had drained from his face, and his hands were gripping his teacup so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "I wanted them to have those qualities," she continued softly, concerned by his reaction but unsure how to interpret it. "Strength and adaptability. They were going to need both. Growing up without—" She trailed off, not finishing the thought. Damien seemed to be struggling to maintain his composure. He set his cup down carefully, his movements deliberately controlled. They're beautiful names," he managed to say, his voice slightly strained. "Excuse me, I just remembered something I need to check." He stood up abruptly and walked inside, leaving Lila wondering what had triggered such a strong reaction. Later that night, after the house had grown quiet, Damien sat alone in his study. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a thick manila envelope. Inside was a stack of papers from the fertility clinic, preserved exactly as they had been 5 years ago. He found what he was looking for near the bottom: the donor questionnaire he'd filled out under the name Daniel 5. His eyes moved down the page until they reached the question that had been haunting him since that afternoon. If you had children, what would you name them? There in his own handwriting were the words that made his world shift. Callan and Rowan, after the trees at my family's cabin. The paper shook in his hands as he stared at the words, his breathing becoming uneven. The coincidence was impossible, yet the evidence was right there in black and white, confirming what he'd begun to suspect weeks ago. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hallway as Lila fussed with Callan's collar, smoothing it for the 3rd time. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted Rowan's sweater next, making sure both boys looked perfect for their evaluation at the prestigious Children's Design Institute. "Mom, you're doing the worried thing again," Callan said softly, placing his small hand over hers. Lila forced herself to take a deep breath. "I just want everything to be perfect for you both." "But you always say perfect isn't real," Rowan chimed in, bouncing on his toes with barely contained excitement. A gentle knock at the door made them all turn. Damien stood there, dressed more casually than usual in a navy blazer and dark jeans. "I thought you might want a ride to the evaluation," he offered, his voice carefully neutral. Lila hesitated. They had planned to take a taxi, but the boys' faces lit up at Damien's suggestion. "Mr. D, can we show you our model in the car?" Rowan asked, already reaching for the carefully wrapped package containing their joint project. I suppose that would be nice, Lila conceded, watching as the twins practically bounced toward Damien. Thank you. The drive to the institute was filled with the boys' excited chatter. They'd placed their treehouse model between them in the back seat, occasionally lifting the protective cloth to check on various details. Damien caught glimpses of them in the rearview mirror, their expressions so familiar it made his chest tight. When we grow up, Callan announced suddenly, we want to be builders of dreams like you. Damien's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Builders of dreams? Yeah, Rowan nodded enthusiastically. Mom showed us the article about your sky garden for sick kids. You made their dreams come true with buildings. The Children's Hospital Project, Lila explained quietly from the passenger seat. They've been fascinated ever since they saw the pictures. Damien swallowed hard, remembering the healing garden he'd designed in memory of his sister. That's a wonderful goal, boys. The institute stood impressive against the morning sky, its modern architecture a testament to innovation and creativity. As they walked through the entrance, Lila held the boys' hands while Damien carried their model. The evaluators greeted them in a bright room filled with natural light and display cases of previous students' work. When it came time to present, the twins stood together before their model, their nervousness forgotten as they explained their design. The treehouse was unlike anything the evaluators had seen from children their age, a perfect blend of whimsy and practical engineering. You see, Callan explained, pointing to the support structure, we made it so the tree can still grow. The house moves with it. And look at the bridges, Rowan added, demonstrating how the connecting walkways could be adjusted. They're like real suspension bridges, but tiny. The evaluators exchanged impressed glances as the boys continued their presentation, using terms like load-bearing and spatial flow with natural ease. One of them, an older woman with silver hair, leaned close to Damien. They speak like someone raised in blueprints, she whispered, her tone appreciative. The technical vocabulary, the spatial awareness, it's remarkable for their age. Damien nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He watched as the boys answered questions about their design choices, their responses thoughtful and bright. Lila stood to the side, her hands clasped tightly together, pride and anxiety warring on her face. After the evaluation, they waited in the institute's garden while the panel reviewed their notes. The boys explored the sculptural installations, their energy seemingly boundless. Damien watched them with a mixture of joy and longing that felt almost physical. They did wonderfully, he said to Lila, who sat on a nearby bench. We should celebrate. Perhaps lunch? There's a nice restaurant nearby that's good with children. Lila's expression softened, but she shook her head. Thank you, but we should probably head home. They'll be exhausted once the excitement wears off. She stood, calling to the twins. Boys, time to go. Damien watched them walk away, Callan and Rowan each holding one of Lila's hands, chattering about their presentation. The ache in his chest grew stronger with each step they took, every fiber of his being wanting to call them back, to tell them, what? The truth he himself was still struggling to process. That evening, alone in his study, Damien received an email from the institute. His hands shook as he opened the attachment, an acceptance letter for both boys, complete with full scholarships. The evaluators had been beyond impressed, noting their exceptional talent and unique perspective on architectural concepts. But it was a line near the bottom that made his breath catch. We look forward to continuing your family's legacy of architectural innovation, Mr. Vale. They had assumed he was the boy's father. Of course they had. The application had included his alias, Daniel Vive, as a reference, along with detailed information about architectural influences in the boy's early development. The pieces had fallen into place exactly as he'd feared they would. Damien set the letter down and opened his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he typed, Legal rights, anonymous sperm donor. The search results filled his screen. each link offering information he both craved and dreaded. He clicked through articles and legal websites, absorbing information about donor privacy, parental rights, and the complex web of laws surrounding assisted reproduction. The words blurred together as the night wore on, but sleep remained elusive. His mouse lingered over a link titled "Establishing Paternity in Sperm Donation Cases." The cursor blinked steadily, like a heartbeat, waiting for his decision. The soft sound of footsteps in the hallway, probably Lila doing her evening check of the house, made him close the laptop abruptly. Damien leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The acceptance letter sat innocently on his desk, a simple piece of paper that had the power to change everything. He picked it up again, reading the boys' names printed in formal text, feeling simultaneously proud and terrified. The night stretched ahead, long and sleepless, filled with questions he wasn't sure he was ready to answer. Later, thunder cracked across the night sky, rattling windows throughout the Vale mansion. Rain pelted against glass in heavy sheets, creating an ominous backdrop to the otherwise quiet house. It was well past midnight when a desperate gasp broke through the storm's rhythm, followed by the sound of running feet. Lila burst into the living room, her heart pounding as she held a wheezing Rowan in her arms. His small body shuddered with each labored breath, face flushed and swollen. Kalen trailed behind them, clutching his brother's favorite stuffed animal, tears streaming down his face. "Baby, stay with me," Lila whispered, fumbling for her phone. Her hands trembled as she tried to remember where she'd put Rowan's emergency kit. The symptoms had come on so suddenly. He'd been fine at dinner. But now... She dialed Damien's number without thinking, her voice breaking as soon as he answered. "Something's wrong with Rowan. He can't breathe properly. I think it was something at dinner, but I checked everything for nuts. I always check." "I'm coming." Damien's voice cut through her panic, clear and focused. "Keep him upright. I'll be there in 2 minutes." True to his word, Damien appeared moments later, still in his gray sweatpants and white t-shirt, feet bare against the marble floors. He took in the scene quickly, Rowan's labored breathing, Lila's terrified expression, Kalen's quiet sobs, and immediately took charge. "My car's outside. We need to get him to the hospital now." He scooped Rowan into his arms with surprising gentleness. "Kalen, buddy, can you be brave and help your mom grab Rowan's medical bag?" The drive to the hospital was tense, with Damien navigating the rain-slicked streets while Lila sat in the back, holding Rowan close. His breathing had become more strained, each inhale a frightening struggle. Kalen held his brother's hand, whispering encouragement through his tears. Emergency room staff rushed to meet them as soon as they arrived. Rowan was quickly placed on a gurney, his small form nearly lost among the medical equipment. A nurse fired questions at Lila about allergies, medications, and family history. "He's allergic to tree nuts," Lila started, her voice shaking. "But I always check everything. I'm so careful." She fumbled through her purse, searching for Rowan's medical card. I can't remember all the medications he's on." "I have his information." Damien stepped forward, pulling out his phone. He'd apparently kept detailed records of both boys' medical histories. "He's on 3 medications for allergies and asthma. No latex allergies, but sensitive to certain adhesives. Blood type A positive." The nurse nodded, typing quickly. "We'll need to do a quick genetic scan to rule out any hereditary complications with the treatment. Are you the father?" Before either could respond, another nurse called out urgently from Rowan's bedside. The first nurse rushed away, leaving them in a temporary bubble of chaos. Doctors and nurses moved swiftly around Rowan, attaching monitors and starting treatment. Lila stood frozen, watching helplessly as medical staff worked on her son. Damien placed a steady hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Kalen pressed against her side, silent tears still falling. Minutes stretched like hours, until finally, a doctor approached them with results from the initial tests. "We've stabilized him," she began, relief evident in her voice. "The genetic scan showed no concerning markers, but..." She glanced at her tablet, brow furrowing. Mr. Vale, the system is showing a direct paternal match between you and the patient. Are you not listed on his birth certificate? The world seemed to stop. Lila turned slowly to look at Damien, whose face had gone completely pale. Their eyes met, and in that moment, understanding crashed over them both like a wave. I didn't know either, Damien whispered, his voice barely audible. Lila felt her knees go weak. The clinic, the donation, all those coincidences that weren't coincidences at all. She steadied herself against the wall, mind reeling with implications. The doctor, sensing the tension, quietly excused herself after assuring them Rowan would make a full recovery. They were led to his room, where he lay sleeping peacefully, his breathing finally normal. Callan climbed carefully onto the bed beside his brother, protective even in his exhaustion. Lila moved mechanically, gathering their scattered belongings. Her hands shook as she collected Rowan's clothes, folded them with unnecessary precision. The truth hung heavy in the air between her and Damien, neither able to find words. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "For coming, for knowing his medical information, for ... She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Without meeting Damien's eyes, she turned and walked out of the room, disappearing down the long hospital hallway. Damien stood in the doorway, watching her go, understanding that everything had changed in the space of a single storm. He waited in the room with the sleeping boys, hoping she would return. Hours passed. The storm outside gradually quieted to a gentle rain. Morning light began to creep through the windows, casting long shadows across the hospital floor. Still, Lila didn't come back. When Damien finally returned home, the house felt different, empty in a way it had never been before. He walked to Lila's room, already knowing what he would find. The closet stood open, clothes gone. The boys' room was similarly bare, their favorite toys and books missing. In the kitchen, morning sunlight fell across a single piece of paper folded neatly on the table. Beside it lay a forwarding address, written in Lila's careful hand. The house around him was silent, the kind of quiet that comes with absolute absence. Even the usual morning sounds seemed muted, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Damien stood in the kitchen, the weight of loss pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. The space felt cold, despite the warm morning sun streaming through the windows. Everything that had made the house feel alive, the boys' laughter, Lila's quiet presence, the constant movement of family, was gone. 2 weeks dragged by like years in the Vale mansion. Damien sat at the long breakfast table, his coffee growing cold beside an untouched plate of toast. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, highlighting the empty chairs where Callan and Rowan used to sit. Their absence felt physical, like a weight pressing against his chest. His gaze drifted to the refrigerator, where colorful sketches still hung with magnetic clips. Rowan's bridge designs, all swooping lines and impossible angles. Callan's careful studies of tree structures, each branch meticulously drawn. He couldn't bring himself to take them down. They were the only proof that the past months hadn't been a dream. The house was immaculate, almost sterile. No scattered toys, no crayon marks on the table edges, no half-finished art projects spread across the floor. The cleaning service had done their job thoroughly, erasing every trace of mess. But they'd also erased the warmth, the life that had filled these rooms. He walked through the quiet halls, his footsteps echoing. The boys' drawing corner sat empty, art supplies neatly arranged but untouched. Their special cushions remained exactly where they'd left them, as if waiting for small bodies to plop down and start creating again. At work, Damien tried to lose himself in blueprints and deadlines, but his usual precision faltered. 3 major project proposals, developments he would have knocked out of the park weeks ago, ended up in the recycling bin. The lines wouldn't flow. The spaces felt wrong. The proportions refused to align with his vision. During a site visit to the Children's Park project, he stood staring at the final blueprint for hours. His team waited nervously as he traced the paths with his finger, remembering how Rowan had insisted on making the bridges bouncy but strong, how Callan had carefully explained why the trees needed to form a perfect circle so everyone gets equal shade. "Mr. Vale," his project manager ventured, "should we proceed with the approval?" Damien rolled up the blueprint without signing. "Not yet. It needs something." He couldn't explain what was missing, but he felt it in his bones. Evenings were the hardest. The sunset painted his study in shades of orange and gold, but the beauty felt hollow. Each night, he found himself pulling out the letter he'd written years ago, a message to a child he never thought he'd meet. The paper had grown soft from handling, the corners dog-eared, coffee stains marking the margins where his hands had trembled. "Dear little one," it began, "I'm building you a world of possibilities." The words blurred together as he read them again and again, each architectural metaphor now painfully meaningful. He'd written about strong foundations and open spaces, about rooms filled with light and doors that would always be open. He'd promised safety, creativity, and unconditional love, all while hiding behind anonymity. One crisp afternoon, his feet carried him past the boys' new school. The playground buzzed with activity, children's laughter floating over the fence. His heart stopped when he spotted them. Callan sat alone on a bench, sketching in a notebook instead of joining the games. Rowan stood near the jungle gym, clutching a pencil and paper instead of climbing with the other kids. They looked smaller somehow, more subdued. The spark that had lit up his breakfast table was dimmed. Damien ducked behind a large oak tree, his chest tight. Did he have any right to be here? To watch them from afar like some sort of ghost? He was their biological father. The genetic scan had proved that. But what did that mean when he'd been a stranger for most of their lives? Back in his study that evening, his laptop chimed with a new email. The subject line made his hands shake. Family Design Showcase, Special Invitation. It was from the boy's teacher, addressed to both him and Lila. The message was warm, explaining how students had spent weeks creating models of their dream homes. These personal projects would be displayed at an evening showcase next week. "Your presence would mean so much," the teacher wrote. "The children have put their hearts into these designs. No RSVP required. Just an open invitation to come and see what they'd built." Damien stared at the screen until his eyes burned. The cursor hovered over the email, which sat unopened like a challenge in his inbox. The empty house pressed in around him, every silent room an accusation of what he'd lost, or perhaps what he'd never really had. He stood up slowly, walking to the boys' drawing corner. The cushions still held slight indentations where they used to sit. He lowered himself onto one, feeling oddly large in this space made for children. His fingers traced the edge of their art table, where pencil marks and tiny nicks told stories of countless hours spent creating. The quiet was deafening, but something shifted in his chest, a decision crystallizing with the clarity of a perfectly balanced design. He pulled his keys from his pocket and stood up, straightening his shoulders. "I'll go," he said aloud to the empty room, "just to see." His voice sounded strange in the silence, but the words felt right. They felt like the first true thing he'd said in weeks. The autumn evening wrapped the school building in a gentle golden light as Damien Vale pulled his car into a spot 2 blocks away. He'd deliberately chosen distance, from the school, from the moment, from the possibility of pain. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel as he watched parents and children stream through the front doors, their excited chatter carrying across the quiet street. He'd dressed simply, a charcoal sweater, dark slacks, leather shoes worn soft from use. No designer labels, no expensive watch, nothing that screamed billionaire architect. Tonight wasn't about Vale Industries or its CEO. Tonight was about 2 little boys who'd drawn a perfect treehouse and turned his world upside down. As he walked the 2 blocks, Damien rehearsed potential conversations in his head. "Hello, Lila," felt too formal. "I've missed you all," seemed too forward. "I'm sorry," didn't begin to cover the complexity of their situation. Each practiced phrase sounded hollow, inadequate for the weight of this moment. The school's hallways buzzed with activity. Children darted between displays, proud parents snapped photos, and teachers guided visitors through the maze of creative projects. Paper stars hung from the ceiling, and hand-painted banners proclaimed, "Welcome to our dream homes," in rainbow colors. Damien slipped in quietly, keeping to the edges of the crowd. His height gave him an advantage as he scanned the room, heart quickening when he spotted them. Callan and Rowan stood beside the largest model in the room, their faces glowing with excitement as they gestured to various features of their creation. The model commanded attention, a sprawling cardboard structure that somehow managed to look both fantastical and architecturally sound. A banner above it read, "The Heart House" in careful block letters, Callan's precise handwriting. The boys wore matching blue sweaters, their dark hair neatly combed, but their animated movements showed barely contained enthusiasm. As Damien drew closer, the details of their design became clear. The house rose 3 stories, with curved walls that seemed to embrace its inhabitants. A rooftop garden featured tiny paper trees and what appeared to be a miniature greenhouse. Solar panels, crafted from silver foil, lined the south-facing roof, and rain collection barrels dotted the perimeter. But it was the interior details that made his breath catch. Through the carefully cut windows, he could see 3 bedrooms labeled in the boy's handwriting. Callan's room, with its wall of bookshelves, Rowan's room, with a craft table, and simply your room, larger than the others, with a drafting table visible through the window. A cozy reading nook extended from the living room, labeled Mom's Special Place, with a tiny paper armchair and bookshelf. Near the garden, a small wooden bench caught the light, hand-carved from what looked like popsicle sticks. A tiny sign beside it read, "Dreaming Chair for Daddy." Teachers gathered around the model, murmuring in impressed tones about the technical skill and emotional depth displayed. One older woman wiped her eyes as Rowan explained how the house was designed for growing love, like a garden. Through the shifting crowd, Damien spotted Lila. She stood apart from the other parents, her hands clasped tightly together, face a mixture of pride and uncertainty. She wore a simple blue dress that matched the boys' sweaters, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She looked both stronger and more vulnerable than he remembered. Before he could decide whether to approach, Callan's head turned. The boy's eyes widened, face lighting up with pure joy. "Mr. D!" he called out, causing several heads to turn. Rowan spun around, nearly knocking over a paper tree in his excitement. They rushed forward, grabbing Damien's hands and pulling him toward their creation. "We saved your spot," Rowan announced, pointing to the dreaming chair. "See, it's just for you." Damien knelt beside them, bringing himself to their eye level. His throat felt tight, voice barely above a whisper. "You did all this?" Callan nodded eagerly. "We worked on it every day after school. The teachers helped with the hard cutting parts, but we designed everything. Even the rain collectors," Rowan added proudly, "because you always say good buildings should help the earth." "And look," Callan pointed to the bedroom wing, "we made sure everyone has their own space to create, but also big spaces to be together." "You were always part of the plan," Rowan said simply, his small hand resting on Damien's shoulder. The words held no judgment, no accusation, just the pure acceptance that children sometimes offer when adults have tied themselves in knots. The crowd around them had grown quiet, sensing the emotion of the moment. Several teachers dabbed at their eyes, impressed not just by the technical achievement, but by the heart behind it. One whispered to another about how the design showed remarkable understanding of family dynamics and emotional needs, sophisticated concepts for such young architects. Damien studied every detail of their creation, asking questions about their choices, listening intently as they explained each feature. They'd included a music room, because happy houses need songs, and a laboratory for inventing things to help people. Every space had been thoughtfully considered, every detail infused with purpose and love. The applause started spontaneously when the boys finished their presentation. Their classmates crowded forward, asking questions and pointing out favorite features. Damien rose slowly, his knees slightly unsteady. He turned and found Lila had moved closer. She stood just a few feet away, her eyes meeting his. The noise of the room seemed to fade as they looked at each other. No words passed between them, but something shifted in the space that separated them. The hard edges of hurt began to soften, replaced by something warmer, understanding perhaps, or forgiveness, or the recognition that sometimes the most perfect designs come from embracing imperfection. In that moment of silent connection, with their son's creation of hope standing between them, something new began to take root. Like the first line drawn on a blank page, it held all the possibility of what might come next. The evening air had grown crisp as Damien walked beside Lila and the twins through the nearly empty school parking lot. Their footsteps echoed against the asphalt, accompanied by the soft rustling of autumn leaves. Callan and Rowan trudged along sleepily, each clutching a blue ribbon and certificate from the showcase. Their earlier excitement had given way to that particular kind of childhood exhaustion that comes after a big event. Lila's car sat alone under a streetlight, its silver paint catching the warm glow. She opened the back doors, and the boys climbed in without their usual chatter. As she leaned in to buckle them, Damien caught glimpses of their drooping heads and heavy eyelids. Within moments, both were asleep, Rowan's certificate already slipping from his small fingers. Lila straightened and closed the doors quietly. For the first time since that night at the hospital, they were truly alone. The streetlight cast long shadows across their faces as they stood in the gentle October wind, neither quite ready to break the silence. Damien cleared his throat softly. They did amazing work tonight. They did, Lila agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. She wrapped her arms around herself, more from nervousness than cold. Lila, Damien started, then paused, running a hand through his hair. There's so much I need to tell you. So much I should have said weeks ago. She nodded slowly, turning to face him fully. I think we both have things to say. 5 years ago, he began, his voice steadying as he found the words. My sister passed away. She was everything to me. Raised me after our parents died. Her last words to me were about not ending up alone. He swallowed hard. I was in a dark place after that, questioning everything. One day I walked into that clinic, not with any real plan, just this vague idea about legacy, about not letting her final wish go unfulfilled. Lila listened intently, her expression softening as he continued. I used the name Daniel V, kept everything anonymous, strict privacy agreements. I never planned to follow up, never thought. He gestured helplessly. And then one morning, there were these 2 boys drawing my childhood treehouse design, calling me Daddy. The universe has a strange sense of humor sometimes. The donor profile, Lila said quietly. Something about it felt steady, safe. The way it described architecture as a form of caretaking. The part about building spaces where people could grow and heal. She smiled faintly. I never expected to find that same voice in my employer's kitchen, teaching my sons about load-bearing walls. Damien's eyes crinkled slightly. When did you realize? Little things started adding up. The way Callan holds his pencil, exactly like you do. Rowan's spatial awareness. Then that night at the hospital. She shook her head. I didn't run because I was afraid, Damien. I ran because suddenly everything I'd been carefully keeping in neat separate boxes came crashing together. the kind employer, the anonymous donor, the father of my children, the man I was starting to... She stopped herself, looking away. I never pursued fatherhood after that donation, Damien said softly. Never thought it would find me like this. Through blueprint reviews and breakfast conversations. Through two brilliant boys who see the world in angles and arches, just like I did at their age. He reached into his coat and pulled out a large manila envelope. I've been working on something since you left. Lila took the envelope with slightly trembling hands. Inside were several sheets of architectural drawings, but these weren't the stark technical blueprints she was used to seeing around his office. These were warmer, more personal, rendered in soft pencil with careful attention to light and shadow. As she unfolded them, her breath caught. It wasn't just a building. It was a home. Their names were woven into the very structure. A reading nook with Lila carved into the window seat. Bedrooms marked Callan and Rowan with their favorite activities built into the design. A rooftop garden stretched across the top level, full of the trees they were named for. A hallway of skylights created patterns that would dance across the floors throughout the day. The boys modeled tonight, Damien said quietly. They saw something I've been trying to understand for months now. That sometimes the strongest structures aren't built on perfect symmetry or careful distance. They're built on the messy, wonderful reality of people choosing each other, day after day. Lila traced her fingers over the detailed drawings, taking in every thoughtful element. Her eyes grew misty as she recognized pieces of their shared story embedded in the design. A kitchen island perfect for morning drawings, a patio for evening tea, spaces that could hold both solitude and togetherness. This isn't a proposal, Damien said gently. It's a blueprint. No pressure, no timeline. Just a door I hope you'll one day open. Lila pressed the blueprints to her chest, tears spilling onto her cheeks. She looked up at him, seeing past the careful architect to the man who'd been quietly building bridges all along. I'll think about it, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Damien smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and softened every careful line of his face. For the first time since that morning with the treehouse drawing, he felt truly at peace. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hart House, casting long golden rays across the bamboo floors. Outside, sparrows and finches fluttered around the rooftop garden, diving between the young Callan and Rowan trees that had been specially planted there. The house stood peaceful in the early light, its clean lines and warm woods creating the perfect balance of modern design and cozy comfort. Inside, 5-year-old Callan sat cross-legged by the bay window, his small fingers covered in watercolor paint as he worked intently on his latest masterpiece. The morning light caught the auburn highlights in his hair, making them glow like copper wire. Beside him, scattered sheets of paper showed his previous attempts, each one a careful study of the view outside. Across the room, Rowan had constructed an impressive span of wooden blocks that stretched from the coffee table to the ottoman. His tongue poked out slightly as he carefully placed each piece, testing the stability with gentle pokes of his finger. The bridge was already showing his signature style, bold and experimental, yet surprisingly sturdy. Damien padded into the living room, his bare feet silent against the floor. He wore a soft, well-worn MIT Architecture Department t-shirt and plaid pajama pants, a far cry from his usual tailored suits. A steaming coffee mug warmed his hands as he paused to take in the scene before him. These quiet morning moments still caught him off guard sometimes, filling his chest with a warmth he never knew he'd been missing. "Good morning, my little architects," he said softly, setting his coffee down on a coaster. Both boys' heads snapped up, their faces breaking into identical grins. "Daddy!" they called out in unison, abandoning their projects to rush toward him. Damien knelt down, opening his arms wide as they crashed into him with the full force of their morning energy. He wrapped them both in a tight hug, pressing a kiss to each of their heads. The scent of children's shampoo and sleep-warm skin filled his nose, a fragrance no expensive cologne could ever match. "What's the structural integrity report on that bridge, Ro?" he asked, ruffling Rowan's dark curls. "It's gonna hold an elephant," Rowan declared proudly. "Is that so?" Damien chuckled. "We might have to scale down our testing parameters slightly." "Come see my painting, Daddy." Callan tugged at his hand, pulling him toward the window. "I used the special technique you showed me for the shadows." Movement in the doorway drew Damien's attention. Lila stood there, wrapped in a soft gray robe, her dark hair piled messily atop her head. She held her favorite sketchbook, the one with the leather cover he'd given her when they first moved in. Several colored pencils were tucked behind her ear, and a gentle smile played at her lips as she watched their morning ritual unfold. The sight of her still made his heart skip a beat. Not because she looked perfect, she didn't, with her sleep-creased face and old robe, but because she looked real, present, home. "Mama!" Rowan called out. "Come look at my bridge. It's gonna hold an elephant." "An elephant, huh?" Lila raised an eyebrow at Damien, who shrugged innocently. She walked over to examine the wooden construction. "Well, the support structure looks promising, but maybe we should start with something smaller, like a teddy bear." The living room wall behind them told their story in pictures and paper. Dozens of the boys' drawings were displayed in simple frames, their progression visible from early scribbles to more recent detailed sketches. There were blueprints for imaginary castles, designs for rocket-powered cars, and countless variations of their dream house. At the center of it all hung the blueprint Damien had given Lila that night in the school parking lot, now professionally framed. In the bottom corner, 4 signatures were carefully penned: Damien Vale, Lila Ray Vale, Callan Vale, Rowan Vale. They gathered around the kitchen island for breakfast, sunlight pouring through the skylights Damien had insisted on installing. Lila set out plates of whole-grain waffles, cut into architectural shapes, of course, while the boys argued good-naturedly about whose bridge design would win that afternoon's competition. "Are we going to the treehouse today?" Callan asked hopefully, carefully arranging his waffle pieces into a perfect square. Damien looked up from his coffee with a serious expression that didn't quite hide his amusement. "Only if your bridge passes safety inspection," he replied solemnly. Everyone burst out laughing, the sound echoing off the high ceilings and filling the space with joy. It was a running joke now, Damien's insistence on proper structural integrity in even their smallest projects. But they all knew it came from love, from his desire to teach them not just about building things, but about building them right. The day passed in a comfortable blur of family activity. The bridge competition was declared a tie after rigorous testing with various stuffed animals, and the treehouse visit was deemed a success. All safety protocols observed, naturally. As evening settled over the city, the boys were tucked into their beds, their rooms carefully designed to nurture their unique personalities while keeping them close to each other. Later, Damien and Lila sat together in the rooftop garden, surrounded by the gentle rustling of leaves and the soft glow of carefully placed lighting. The city sprawled out before them, a tapestry of lights and shadows, but their attention was focused on their own small corner of it, their sanctuary. No grand speeches were needed, no dramatic declarations. They had moved beyond that now, into something deeper and more comfortable. Lila leaned against Damien's shoulder, her body fitting perfectly against his side. The evening air carried the scent of the herbs she'd planted, mixed with the lingering warmth of the day. Damien looked around at their home, at the garden they'd planted together, at the little workspace where the boys did their projects, at the comfortable seating area where they spent countless evening hours, at the woman beside him who had taken his carefully ordered world and filled it with beautiful chaos. "Home looks good on us," he said softly. Lila snuggled closer, her hand finding his. She looked at their house, not perfect, with scuff marks on the walls and toys sometimes scattered where they shouldn't be, but perfectly theirs. It wasn't the perfect house, she murmured, but it was ours. And it was finally home. If you enjoyed the story of Damien and Lila, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.